Good evening, everyone. My name is Cassandra Cavness, and I am the Development Assistant for the Montgomery Museum of Fine Arts. Welcome to Creative Conversations with Bethany Collins. This is an amazing opportunity for us to get an inside peek into Bethany's mind and into her work that is currently in our gallery and will be on display starting Saturday. Joining us today, we have, of course, Bethany Collins, but we also have MMFA Curator Jennifer Jankauskas, who will be leading this conversation for us today. Jennifer?
Thank you, Cassandra. And I also want to extend my welcome to all of you who are joining us this evening. I'm pleased to introduce you to Bethany and to provide a view into her stunning exhibition, My Destiny is in Your Hands, which we just opened and will remain on view until May 9th. Before I do, I want to acknowledge those who have had a hand in bringing this exhibition to Montgomery. First, thank you to our lead sponsor, Alabama Power Foundation. We're also grateful to the Alabama Humanities Foundation, who supported this project through a grant. I also want to express my gratitude to Olivia at Patron Gallery, who has helped us work through so many details in bringing the exhibition to fruition, and of course to Bethany for sharing her talent and creativity with us. Bethany is a native of Montgomery, and she currently lives and works in Chicago, which is where she's joining us from. She uses drawing, installation, and performance to critically explore the interaction of race and language, along with notions of home and belonging. Language is also the tool that allows her to explore American history and the nuance of racial and national identities. Bethany received a BA in Studio Art and Visual Journalism from the University of Alabama and an MFA from Georgia State University. She is the recipient of numerous awards, including the Artadio Award, which she has received twice. The Artist Fellowship Award from the Illinois Art Council Agency, the Hudgens Prize, and a Polly Krasner Grant. Additionally, Bethany was the Public Humanities Practitioner in Residence at Davidson College in 2020, an Artist in Residence at the Studio Museum in Harlem from 2013 to 2014, and a National Endowment for the Arts Fellow at the MacDowell Colony in 2015. Her work is a part of numerous museum collections, including, among others, the Art Institute of Chicago, the Smart Museum of Art in Chicago, the Studio Museum in Harlem, New York, the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem, Massachusetts, the Birmingham Museum of Art, the High Museum of Art in Atlanta, and also, we're happy to say, the collection of the Montgomery Museum of Fine Arts. We're thrilled to feature Bethany's work here in Montgomery. It's creating a homecoming of sorts for her, and we've been working on this exhibition for over 3 years, but we're so happy to be presenting it now at this current moment because it feels incredibly timely and important. As to the format of tonight's program, we've asked Bethany to discuss the pieces in the exhibition along with some of her other works. Afterwards, she and I will walk through the installation and we'll have a conversation. Please be thinking of questions and feel free to ask the questions in the comments section and we'll try to get to all of them. Now I'm going to turn it over to Bethany.
Thank you. It's really nice to be, I wish we were there in person, but it is nice to be here with you this way. So I wanted to share some, play from start, some images to give context to what's in the exhibition. So many of these are not actually in the show, but I think they'll give a kind of framework for us to talk about what's actually on view. So this is one of the first times that I ever used language in my practice. This is from my white noise series ever. This is where language comes from for me. So language in my work it's the subject of the work. It is what the work is about. It is also a kind of my primary material. And I found the more that I work with it, it remains a kind of prism through which to interrogate any and all other topics. You can look at a dictionary from any given decade. There is so much that it becomes a kind of mirror and a reflective surface for figuring out who we were, how we wanted to be seen, and who we are in any given time period. So language is very much reflective of us, good or bad. So for me, when I was in grad school at the time, I was the only Black grad student in a peer group of primarily white grads. And I was making work about race and identity. It was grad school work. It wasn't that good, but it was leading to these very awkward critiques. For instance, I made a paper bag piece that was about colorism within the Black community. And the critique I got was, well, don't you think your work is a little elitist because I don't know that history of the paper bag test? Or maybe if you make the paper bag into a slave ship, then I would get that it's about race. Or I just don't see race, so I can't critique your work. And so none of these were very helpful critiques. They didn't actually feel like they were addressing the work itself, but much more the speaker's own attempt to figure something out in themselves about their own views around race and identity, not about the work. And so I started to take that language from critiques, and what you're seeing here is write it over and over again. So for instance, that phrase, maybe you should make it into a slave ship. I would write that 1,000 times and deconstruct it into what you're seeing are these tiny letters. They look like sometimes snow flurries, kind of weather zones, geographical formations, but they're actually just the letters of the initial statement or phrase that felt like problem, and writing it 100, 1,000 times and breaking it apart, exploding it into white noise. And also by the end of that process, making it into hopefully something that's a little bit more beautiful than it started off as. For me, was a way to understand the intent behind the initial language. And the threads of this kind of process continue throughout all of my work, right? So language starts as problem. I obsess on it and I repeat it, often with some sort of limitation that involves pain. For these, I would write it until my hand hurt. And that's how I knew I had to be done with the piece. I just had to let it go and step away. And then that it starts as problem and becomes beautiful. The necessity for beauty at the end of the work also is another thread that continues throughout my practice. I also wanted to bring this work up from the White Noise series in particular, because it's based on a Montgomery Advertiser article. They interviewed my parents. My whole family was leaving a Habitat for Humanity, I think, volunteer site, and they interviewed us. And then the next day, they just identified us all as unrelated. So that's the name for the piece. And that's what's rewritten 1,000 times into white noise. The next works, though, this is the heart of the show. My destiny is in your hands. But a lot of the next works that I wanted to show you, all of them come after the 2016 presidential election. They're very much an attempt to grapple with that moment in American history, when a place can feel very familiar and simultaneously estranging at the same time. You know it and you don't know it. So for me, when there is a problem in the world, there is a problem in language, I like to look backwards to make sense of the now. So America, a Hymnal is based on contrafactum. These are, like Weird Al Yankovic does this now. It's a less common practice, but it used to be really popular in early American songbooks, where you would keep the melody consistent, but then you could rewrite the lyrics with the expectation that everybody knows the melody for My Country 'Tis of Thee, or the Star Spangled Banner, or Amazing Grace even. The melody remains constant, but we can then rewrite the lyrics for all these different political and social causes. So My Country 'Tis of Thee is the basis for America, a Hymnal. It is 100 versions of My Country 'Tis of Thee, written from the 18th to the 20th centuries. Different versions are written for the suffrage movement, temperance, lots of prohibition versions, too many. The Confederacy has their multiple versions of My Country 'Tis of Thee. So does the Union Army, and so does the abolitionist movement. And so oftentimes these, patriotic anthems that are proclaiming what it means to be American are in opposition to one another. And that felt like a way to think about that immediate aftermath of the 2016 presidential election, that we've actually never been in agreement about what it means to be American. At best, we get like 51%, right? Maybe 60 at best. So for the hymnal then, I bound 100 versions together and burned the musical notation away. So the thing that is holding all these dissenting versions of what it means to be American together is gone. It's actually charred from the page. And what's left is just 100 different versions, different songs, or different lyrics to the same song. 100 dissenting songs then are left, 100 dissenting versions of what it means to be American. That's what you got. What I also like about this work, though, is that, and I think every week, maybe the pages will be turned to the hymnal for the exhibition. So you'll get to see a few different pages. But the more that the book is read and the more that the pages are turned, because of that burning away of the musical notes, that the pages will get tangled up together. The absence of those tiny little notes, they'll start to cling the pages together, and it'll become harder to read. In my mind, 20 years from now, 100 years from now, the piece might be an utter mess, maybe. The works are all in different collections, so I think some people will never read the text and it will remain pristine. And some people will engage with the text over and over again, or open it up for viewers actually to turn the pages of the text, and it's going to get really messy. And all of those ways felt like grappling with the immediate presidential aftermath, what it felt like in that moment of dissension. These also came after, and I wanted to mention them not because they're in the exhibition, but because they're also about song, and song is at the heart of our show at the museum. So these panel works came from, I picked up a text by Edie Hirsch. It was published in 1987, 88, and it was called Cultural Literacy, Things Every American Should Know. And Hirsch's premise is, in the back of this book, there's like an index of 5,000 things that, according to Hirsch, if we all know them, then we will feel like we belong together. We're related, right? But it's a list by one man in the 80s, one white man from a particular socioeconomic background. It's like a very specific list. The songs he lists are not the ones I would choose, right? He leaves off Amazing Grace, but he includes is it the World War II song Over There? It's a song. But in that list, there's 9 patriotic songs. And so I took each of those 9 songs and made a painting for each one. And they're all, well, this one is the initial color of the hymnal. It's that same hymnal red, because the song is My Country 'Tis of Thee. And then the language that I'm pulling from each song for the panel to rewrite over and over again is a lyric that feels like it belongs in a love song versus national anthem, patriotic, nationalistic song, right? Thy Name I Love is the lyric that I pulled from My Country 'Tis of Thee, and wrote it in the same way that I did those initial chalkboard piece that I showed you. Same way, write it over and over again until your hand hurts. Call it noise and be done with it. So the song is no longer singable. It counteracts then Hirsch's premise that if we know these things, we'll feel like we belong together. If the song cannot be sung together, then we cannot feel like we belong in the same place. What also happens to the series, though, after that initial red, is that they fall darker and darker into shadow. And also, this piece, White Noise, it's chalk on the chalkboard or painting on the panel. This is charcoal on the same panel, different color red and black charcoal. So it changes from white noise, which is like TV static, to black noise, which, there's all these different frequencies of noise, and we tend to name them by colors. So white noise is TV static. Blue noise sounds like an egg in a frying pan. Red noise people tend to listen to fall asleep at night. And then black noise is pure silence. So though the lyric is who more than self, right? That love lyric, who more than self, written over and over again until it becomes noise, it also becomes unsingable in its silence. The final piece, this is I Am For You, You're a Grand Old Flag. But the final piece, I actually omitted one of Hirsch's songs Over There. There's not a lot of love language in that song. And I included instead Amazing Grace. So it feels like my collaboration with Edie Hirsch, my update. Another form of song, and then I want to talk about the wallpaper piece that's at the heart of the show. So these are classified ads that were published by formerly enslaved people right before the end of the Civil War, all the way up until the 1920s. And they posted these ads as they were looking for their family members. So I made this piece right after the family separation crisis at the border. So another way of thinking about how do you deal with the current problem in the world, and can I find a repetition of that moment in the past to make it make sense, or at least to give it context. So after the family separation crisis at the border, I started looking at these ads because they were similarly people looking for their family for decades. I mean, 40, 50 years. Sometimes people would post over and over again every year, the same or similar ad, still looking for their loved ones. And they would include everything that they could remember. So it would be nicknames, maybe an identifying scar, the plantation name, former owners, another name you might have gone by, what you might have changed it to, the name that like nobody knew to call you, but you did. They're love letters. They're really painful love letters. So this process for this work, I embossed the work. That process involves engraving text. So I looked at this archive that's actually, they're digitizing a lot of these classified ads from 6 Black newspapers across the Southeast up to the Northeast. So I found these ads, engraved the text into acrylic plates, and then you soak a piece of paper so it becomes malleable. Place the soaked paper on top of that engraved text, and you run it through the printing press, which applies a tremendous amount of pressure. And when you lift it up, the text is now protruding from the surface. So what's still legible, it's getting really close because I can read it too. What's still legible, the text is still legible, but it's actually an inkless process. So it's printed, but it's also, there's nothing printed at the same time. There's a kind of ghostly quality to it. I repeat that process twice to hint at the repetition of the past, right? This separating of family members as a form of control and torture. And the way that that mimics the family separation crisis again and again throughout American history. And in that process of doing it twice, the paper doesn't hold up the second time, it starts to fall apart. And so they all fall apart in slightly different ways. The song of this work, though, is that it happens when not everybody could read at the time, not everybody was getting the paper. And so a lot of times ministers would actually read classified ads from the pulpit so that it could reach a broader audience. And people would hear how other people were asking for their family, and they would start to repeat that. So, do you know them? Have you seen her? Can you help me to find my people? Those became the refrains, those kind of tortured, loving refrains of looking for your family. And I think that gives a little bit of context to the wallpaper work, the installation in the Montgomery Museum. So this work is called My Destiny is in Your Hands. And I want to be sure that I can actually translate the works for you. So the piece is based on floriography, which is the language of flowers. It didn't, the language of flowers, it didn't start in Victorian England, but it enjoyed a resurgence in 19th century Victorian England. And then from like mid 1800s to 1923, there were at least 98 flower dictionaries circulating in the US alone. So it's not just a kind of English pastime, it also is brought to the States. And in a way you could send, I mean, the idea was you could send a talking bouquet to someone. They would use their flower dictionary and translate it. And you could say things, these kind of covert messages that were difficult to say aloud. You could say them through flowers. You could say them through these talking bouquets. So for my purposes, I was looking at, flowers that represent us. They're the official state flowers. And then translating official state flowers for states in the American South, but pairing them next to flowers along the Great Migration route. So those 3 kind of tributaries out of the South, where people left the South and changed not only this place, but the new places that they made homes in. I just realized this is probably really hard to see. Oh, sorry, not that. It's hard to see, but that's intentional. So the flowers are actually their white flock, which is like that velvety material. It used to be a really common wallpaper practice. I think now it's seen as kind of kitschy. It's not as in vogue as it used to be. But if you can tell, it's the flock is actually in the shape of all these flowers. So if we go back, or I'll just keep it here while I tell you the translations for these. So My Destiny is in Your Hands. So some of these flowers, their translations include, I think Delaware is the peach blossom, and it translates to, I am your captive. Louisiana is the iris, the purple iris, and it translates to, I burn for you. Alabama's state flower is the camellia, and its translation is, my destiny is in your hands. They're all incredibly like Victorian, emotional in a way that's not necessary, Victorian. But also in relationship, like as soon as you say, I am your captive, I burn for you, my destiny is in your hands, in relationship to the American South, it becomes that much more violent. It's as much love letter as it is violent, or reminiscent of the violence of our history. So while the work will look different, depending on where it's installed, this white flocked wallpaper, it can take on different shapes depending on the institution. So it'll look a little bit different in Montgomery than it did in the previous and will in the next. But it must always cover 300, or it must always be about 800 to 900 square feet, so that what's visible is 300 camellia petals. That for me was a way to memorialize the number of lynchings in Alabama post-Reconstruction. So always 300 camellias. I wanted to read you the translation then of all of the flowers together, and then show you a little snippet of something similar to the performance that's going to happen on Saturday. So Alabama is the camellia, my destiny is in your hands. Illinois, where I'm based now, is the milkweed, and it means let me go. My destiny is in your hands. Let me go. Justice, you are cold. I think of you constantly. Do not refuse me, my bane, my antidote. Take care while I'm away. I burn for you. Justice, welcome me. It's as much love letter as it is indictment. So last thing, on Saturday, there's going to be a performance where we collaborated with the Montgomery Chorale to create a singing of all 100 versions, which I'm really looking forward to. Since I can't be there in person, it will be live streamed, kind of like what we're doing tonight from the galleries. A few things I wanted to mention. I grew up going to Emmanuel Presbyterian in Montgomery, and we used to do these 48-hour Bible readings. So you would sign up for your hour, 3 a.m., 5 p.m., whatever, and you would go and read from the text. You'd pick up where the last person left off, and you would hope that the next person came to relieve you at the end of the hour. But it was the beautiful idea that even if the pews were empty, even if no one was listening, that this sacred text was worthy of being read back into the world. Now, people do this with like the Odyssey, lots of other less sacred, arguably sacred texts. But that was my idea for the singing of America Hymnal as well. That it would, the first time it was done, it was a kind of open call. Anybody could come and sing from this text of disagreement, right? 100 versions over the course of the day could be sung. The snippet of audio that I wanted you to hear was from a previous performance where the intent was that it would, like all these voices, 6 different singers at a time would be singing, so that it would feel like familiar noise, because the melody's there, but it's hard to make out any particular song at a time. So I wanted you to be able to hear that as a kind of precursor to the performance on Saturday.
Think of the cruel chain, endure no more the pain of slavery. Why should done well, refined, ordained, free.
That's it.
Thank you. I think it's really wonderful to talk about the pieces in the exhibition in depth, but to see what else you're working on. And I think some of the things that you're working on now, as we talk a little bit more, will come back up. So to have that context will be really helpful. But I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and give people a little peek into what your exhibition looks like in our galleries. Okay. Oh, sorry, let's see. There we go. So what we tried to do here is, this is actually, I think, maybe the same image, is create a chapel of sorts. This is something that you're really interested in pairing both the hymnal with My Destiny is in Your Hands. Do you want to talk a little bit about why it's important to have those together when you can?
I think both of the works are about a sense of home and a place, you know, kind of what I was talking about before, a sense of home, belonging to a place that doesn't always claim you back in the same way that you claim it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I made both of the works after the presidential 2016 election. And so they feel very much like they belong together in this kind of sacred space, an attempt to create a sacred space.
You know, it's interesting that you talk about how it has notions of home. So in some ways that's very personal to you, but I think your work has really shifted too from some of the earlier pieces, which we'll see a little bit in the next slides, to going from something that's really personal to exploring more of a national identity too. And so I think, you know, I know some of the other pieces you're working on now, you're doing a whole series of hymnals, I believe, that is really kind of about that and our national identity. So how, I guess, you're constantly kind of incorporating that, you know, playing with both. And I think that that's something that's very specific to your practice too, those binaries, you know, so it's the personal and the national coming together and you're also looking at other binary ideas and other of your work. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, a couple of the works that are in the exhibition are the one that's in the permanent collection actually is based on they're not contrafacting, contronyms.
Mm-hmm.
So contronyms are words that contain their own opposite meanings. So this was the work or the series of work that I found after I was trying to end actually the white noise series. For instance, my favorite contronym is quiddity. Quiddity means the essence of something and a trifling nothing. It is everything and it is nothing at the same time. And when I found this kind of odd category of terms, there's like 88 in the English language. It felt like, especially with quiddity, everything and nothing, that we could be talking about race and identity or 100 other things at the same time. Everything and nothing, and how important race is to American history, everything, but also what is race, you know, beyond a social construct, everything and nothing. And so the contronym series helped me to work my way out of the white noise series, which felt much more personal. It felt like a really direct way to be thinking about race and identity and growing up in the South and what that felt like, and trying to deal with language that I wasn't sure, I couldn't quite figure out how to respond to, that the work helped me respond to it. The Southern Review was kind of similar. The Southern Review came out of moving from, I think, Atlanta to New York. And I kept getting this question over and over again, which was like, oh, how does it feel? They would do that shoulder shrug. How does it feel to be a Southern artist living in New York? And I was like, I don't like your shoulder shrugging at me. I don't know what that means. And also, I've never called myself Southern. It's not, that is not how I imagined myself. Like when you say Southern, the body that I image is white and it's male. And so my body doesn't fit there. So for this series, then, I mean, thinking about the personal, but also beyond the personal, how to get beyond the personal. For this series, I found this literary journal that's been published out of Louisiana State University since the 30s. Very prestigious journal called the Southern Review. So I unbound a couple of quarterly issues, chose some particular pages out of those, right? And then I would fill in the body of each page's text and leave everything else untouched. So titles, authors, footnotes, all are untouched by my hand, but I would fill in with this like super velvety, rich charcoal, the body. And for me, that felt like a way to like address the question through the work. If I can't imagine my body in that, can I rewrite the narrative of what it means to be Southern?
And you're actually leaving traces of your body on the paper too, because it has smudges and fingerprints all across it.
Yes, I feel like I get to co-author then. Like by the time it's finished, it's such a soft charcoal that it's everywhere all over my body, and my fingerprints are also all over the surface, like soot everywhere. And my fingerprints are on the surface. So it does feel like it feels like rewriting what it means. What does it mean to be Southern? Maybe I can insert myself into that narrative. Which is kind of what I did a talk at in Birmingham, Natasha Trethewey, and I told her this, or I mentioned this story, and I think she like gently checked me and said, yeah, maybe, but you could think about, like, if you're not going to claim it, then it leaves open the narrative for everybody else to claim. If, you know, my family's all over the South. If we are not Southern, then who is? So her response was better.
So, we just mentioned how you're leaving part of your body as residue on this work. I think, you started talking about the contronyms. I want to go back to the contronyms a little bit too, because that you're also leaving part of yourself in that work. You're using your spit to erase all of the drawings that you so carefully copied with the dictionary meanings, idioms, and just leaving a little bit less. Everything else is obliterated, really.
Yeah. So for that series, then I would pull out usually from, I think my parents are watching. My parents are born in the 50s. So I love a good 50s dictionary. The language is good. It's still good until the 80s dictionaries, and then it kind of falls off. So at 50s to 80s, I'll pull from those dictionaries, looking for these contronyms. So I'll print them twice then, either on 2 sheets of American Masters bright white paper or onto 1 large sheet of Somerset radiant white paper. So the language is already loaded. The material language is already loaded. So I'll print those definitions twice, let's say for quiddity, and then erase everything except for the opposing definitions, right? So if you print it twice, it gives you the opportunity to show you both of the contradictory definitions of the same word. Or ravel, for instance, the ravel is another contronym. It means to complicate something and to like ball it up like Christmas lights and it gets tangled, or it means to draw it out, make it real simple and linear, right? Both of those things at the same time. So both of those definitions would be left legible and everything else gets smudged. Spit works because it's more acidic than water. And so it actually, by placing spit onto the page, saliva is nicer, onto the page, and then erasing with pink pearl erasers, those old school erasers, it actually eats into the surface of that top layer of the paper. And so what reads as illegibility is actually the destruction of the paper itself, and just kind of fragments are left.
It's really lovely when you see it in person, because you see these little threads of paper that are just barely hanging on, sometimes some at the bottom of the frame where they've fallen. And, there's this tactile quality to that, also to most of your work, actually. You think about that wallpaper, you want to touch it. And like you mentioned with the Southern Reviews, that really rich, velvety charcoal that's on there too. So is that something that's important to you to have that tactile feel?
I don't think as much about the tactility as there's some sort of language that doesn't make sense. And the only way I know to make it make sense is that it needs to register in the body.
Mhm.
So it's like my rewriting it 100 times, it's now part of the body.
Mhm.
And then if I can, adding the spit or the fingerprints, or adding a kind of limitation that I have to write this thing until my hand hurts, there's some sort of mastery that comes from that, right?
Mhm.
It's like eating the text and now it's mine. And here's what I'll allow the viewer to now see, right?
Mhm.
That I get to control the language by the end of the process. It should be mine. Does that make
Mhm.
sense? Yeah.
Yeah. So you're talking about, for when you're creating, you're actually imposing some structures and rules upon yourself for each piece.
Yeah.
Is that true of everything that you make?
Yes. It's all controlled. Yeah, there's always a system, because if there's not, I know some artists work this way and I'm envious of them, but if there's not a system, then it feels like it could, with the white noise pieces or the red noise pieces, that they could abstract into oblivion. How would you know how to stop?
Mhm.
I think the problem is, and something I'm a little bit less interested in these days, is that the end of the work, that the like necessary death of the work maybe doesn't need to necessitate pain.
Mhm.
That felt necessary early on, that labor and some sort of implication of the body and pain in the body gave value to the work. No, I don't know that. I don't feel that way anymore.
Do you feel, though, that, I'm just thinking in terms of the performance that's happening on Saturday. That might not be your pain, but in some ways you are inflicting potential pain on people
I
with
know.
some of the
That's true.
interpretations that you and James have collaborated on, in terms of some of the styles of music that are going to be used are really dissonant. And while that also fits in, I think, to your conceptual framework, it's kind of shifting that pain onto the viewer.
I hope so.
So that was absolutely intentional.
Yeah, but I think that's always been there. This kind of like, I want the viewer to be as frustrated with the work as I was with the initial language. Do you know what I mean? So the illegibility of the pieces, like my control of that and controlling what you can read or not read, that you're not sure what you're looking at, or with a lot of the embossed works, that they're so tempting. There is an intentional desire to touch embedded in the pieces, and that you are forbidden from it. I think there's a lot of ways that I have wanted the viewer to be frustrated, but I do think the transition from my pain to the viewer's pain is actually new.
It does seem that way from what I've observed too. I'm going to shift a little bit here as we go into the last gallery. And this was something I don't know if you've done this before, but I think a little different. And we're really excited to collaborate with you on this. But what we did, sorry, wrong way. What we did was we asked you to sort of guest curate works from our collection to fit in with your exhibition. And you decided to actually create an interpretation of works in our collection using florography.
Yeah, so I looked through the digitized collection, Montgomery's collection, and pulled out works. It starts with the Camellia, so that's the first work in the series. So, and translated from there. Jennifer, do you have the translations? Because I don't have.
I do, yes.
Oh, great. I was going to be like, you guys have to come on Saturday to see what it translates. I don't remember.
And I think I have one more image too. So the translation is, I have a message for you, only for you. My destiny is in your hands. Maternal love, maternal love, maternal love. You may hope. My heart aches for you.
Yeah. I mean, no, I hadn't done this before, so it was nice to get to, I felt a little bit like like a smaller version of Fred Wilson, where he like goes into the museum and rearranges the archive to get you to see things differently that the museum kind of holds or has held for a long time. It felt a little bit like that, that I could show you these paintings, prints, and drawings that have been in the collection for some time, but by translating them, that they take on new meaning. And for me, I chose them intentionally. I mean, the Camellia especially as the heart of the show, but the rest of them as well that they become a kind of love letter to home and a kind of heartache for home.
I'm going to actually stop sharing my screen and we can continue talking before we open it up for questions. But, you know, it's interesting because you've created these poems, and I feel like so much of your work is very poetic. And, you know, to me, it's fascinating. You talk so much about the love language and, you know, that this interpretation is a poem to your home. But yet there's so much, like you, especially in My Destiny is in Your Hand, about the implied violence too. So again, you're dealing with those opposites.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, that is how the South, that feels like a way to define the South, that it is home. And to me, it is really beautiful. And it also has an incredibly violent history, and that both are inescapable. And so home takes on that meaning too, that it's beautiful and it's violent. And I think that's what's at the heart of the hymnal as well, or at least why I made the hymnal. It's about a kind, you know, how do you make sense of loving a place that doesn't always love you back, or belonging to a place that doesn't always claim you? It's all complicated, you know.
Yeah.
What is that Facebook status? Like, it's complicated. It's all really complicated.
Yeah, and you know, I think there's so much to be found in your work with the language and the language that you're, you know, bringing in. I keep going back, I know, to that idea of binary and opposites, but it's interesting because, you know, that implies a duality of two. But really, there's so many binaries that can be incorporated into any of these things, into so much language. And so I think of your work as encompassing all of that, having that multiplicity, really. It's, you know, these, you know, it's beauty and it's ugliness and it's revealing and it's obscuring and it's deconstructing and it's reconstructing. All of those things I think are in your work. And I think from things that we've talked about, that's something that you're very aware of and that you're trying to really bring forth in it.
There's I think that's very true. And I think there's a series that we didn't talk about, or that's not in the show. It's the Odyssey series, the Odyssey. Yeah. And so I was looking specifically at book 13, when Odysseus finally gets home and like doesn't recognize the place. After 20 years, he lands on like multiple shorelines, and he weeps every shoreline or wrong shoreline he lands on. And he finally gets back to his homeland and he doesn't recognize it. And that also felt like a way to think about this political moment. It's like familiar and estranging. But what's really interesting about those translations, and this is where I think the Hymnal and the Odyssey and the more recent work is less interested in that kind of duality, black and white, kind of opposites for abiding one another, and more in the possibility of like, there is no wrong way to, there is no like wrong version of the contronym. There is no wrong or right there. There's actually just 10 different versions or translations of the Odyssey. Does that make sense? So, for instance, when Odysseus stands on the shoreline, doesn't recognize it, and he looks out at the water, translations of the Greek of the ocean, just the water, there's like no agreement in the text, right? So they call it tumultuous, deep voiced, hoarse, or deaf, or whispering shoreline, you know? It's like after centuries, we should at least agree what the water was doing. And there's not, there in language and in us. I don't know, language is reflective. it's just reflective of who we are at a given moment. And so there's not always a kind of, there's not always a solution. There's not always the right way. It's a prism.
Mhm.
Mhm.
It's also interesting that you're often looking at language from historical sources. That you very rarely pull anything to the forefront that's recent. It feels very timely, and the language resonates with what's happening when you're creating it into the future. But can you talk about why you heavily research and look to past things? We've talked a little bit about the authority that's inherent in some of these accepted encyclopedias, dictionaries, and Southern reviews, but talk a little bit more about why you looked at the older materials versus newer things.
I mean, there's a couple reasons. When I mentioned that dictionaries after the 80s like aren't as good, it's true. But like illustrative sentences, they just get a bit, I mean, maybe it's just not my decade, but the 90s dictionaries aren't poetic. They lose their poetry. So I do think there's something about a transition in language that happens in those like 90s, maybe 2000s. It's different. I also like a kind of historical, I think it's like a historical safe distance from the text. So by the time we look at a particular, maybe the Birmingham News from 1963, if we look at those in 2010, like we should all be in agreement about how we're viewing this thing with like 50 years between us. There's some sort of consensus on agreement. Whereas a text that's published last year is it's still up in the air what we think about it collectively. I also think though, I heard an interview that Teju Cole did with Krista Tippett. And he talks about having left behind the creedal belief, so the religion of his childhood, but that he still turned to some of that text and that language, right? And others. It's like, I think he goes on to say, we need a lot of help. All of us need a lot of help. And even if I can't turn to this belief system, I still turn to the texts that have been boiled down to their most quintessential form. And it takes a lot of time to do that, It's like the text of our spiritual and religious traditions and literature and poetry. And he mentions Homer. It takes time to be quintessential. It's hard to get with like the New York Times bestseller list from last year.
Well, I know that we don't have too much time left, and I could continue our conversation, but I know that there's some questions from people in the audience. So I'm going to invite Cassandra to jump back in and share those questions.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of love pouring out to this conversation tonight, but there were a couple of questions. One was more of a technical question about the hymnal. So how did you actually burn away the notation in the hymnal?
A laser cutter. So you can safely burn about 10 pages at a time. I say this because if you try to burn more, your book will catch on fire. And you'll have to use a fire extinguisher in the middle of the night when nobody's looking.
You sound like that's something you've had to do.
Scary. I don't like, I like a lot of control in my work. That was not a moment of control. Laser cutter. So you can actually kind of enter the image, the pattern into the computer, and the laser cutter will burn it away. And you can burn about 10 pages, and then you've got to like flip it, align it again. It's actually pretty rote kind of process.
Do you find that like the top page, burns more cleanly than the ones underneath it, and that then creates some of that catching or disintegration that might happen later?
Like the 10th page will have less char to it. The notes are pretty consistent throughout because it's such a precise laser, but you have to turn it up. Don't tell them. You have to turn it up higher than it's recommended in order to get through 10 pages. So the char on the like first page is going to be heavier and probably make illegible the actual lyrics because it's so strong. And actually that burn, if you keep the book closed for a long time, that burn will kind of consolidate again and it kind of wafts up as you read the text. It doesn't always smell good though. Sometimes it smells quite acrid. Mm.
And how long did that take you to complete the whole hymnal that way?
I think the first one I did probably took like 8 or 10 hours, and then I got a little better at it. Yeah.
But how long does it take you, like this was clearly the technical part that took that amount of time, but you had to deeply research to bring all of these different versions together. So how long would you say you took to bring that piece to fruition?
I don't know, too long. I'll tell you the piece that I still hate because it took forever was this dictionary that I read and then erased all the color terms out of it. So not just the definitions, but every term that would use a color within its to define another word, I would erase. It took a year. I almost said a cuss word. It took a year. I hate that piece. I hate thinking about that piece. Has not come back around. Yeah.
Okay, one of the other
I
questions.
don't hate it. It's been collected. I don't hate it, but it was a lot of labor.
One of the questions that we got concerned the hymnal as well. Are the viewers supposed to smudge the songs further? So you had mentioned something about people like touching it and flipping the pages. So is that like intentional to create that destruction by the viewer?
I never think about I don't think about the viewer a lot, to be honest. When I did the teen program last night, they asked me about my role as an artist and my responsibility as an artist. I have long known that I make the work because I need to resolve something, and then I will give it out to the world, and what will be will be. But the reason for the work, I don't think about anybody else but myself. It's like problem in the world. I need to find something in the past that makes this make sense, and then have some sort of process that I can digest what's happening and get it out of myself. And it is all for me.
And I will jump in that in the gallery, it's actually in a vitrine. We're not inviting people. That's more for the people that collect it.
Another question we had was, can you talk a little bit more about your interest in the song as form, the hymn, the patriotic songs?
I mean, I think generally, song is really interesting right now for me because there's something about it that feels like it's a break from that limitation of pain or the necessity for pain in the work. And it's a different way to think about, what is the word, when the text becomes like physically manifest. It's different because you read the lyrics, the song then comes like it's transformed in the body and comes out a different way. So it feels like 3 different ways to be thinking about language, and none of them necessarily involve pain. It's a different kind of process involved in the body that I think that's why I'm so drawn to it right now, but also because it implies a collectivity. And in this moment that we don't feel particularly collective or in agreement, and not everybody is agreeing with me, that it feels like a way to talk about that. You can't, if it's just you singing the national anthem forever, it's not going to achieve its effect, which is to make us feel like we're of the same people. And so it requires all of us to sing it in order to achieve that transcendent moment. And I like using the failure of that to mirror now.
I think that's all the questions. I think I got everyone's question.
Well, Well, I'm going to jump in with another question. Song clearly is a direction you're moving in, and it's so important to you. And, in a lot of your work, there are elements of the structures of songs. You're using repetition, or you've used the language of the structures of song. I know you had an exhibition recently called Chorus, and there's other refrain. I think I've heard you use that word before. Are you a musician?
No, 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 and I don't have any desire. I will never be the performer for any of these singings of the hymnals. So I'm working on a new hymnal for the Star Spangled Banner. And then what comes after that will be the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And I am looking forward to everyone else performing them. I have no desire. The hymnal for me is the closest that I get to the author. Because while I love, Maggie Nelson calls this like leaning on the language of others, I love other people's language, whether it starts as like problem that needs to be solved, or what Teju Cole mentions, like it's just the help that you need. It can be found in language. I love that, but I hate writing. I hate writing. I can't sing. I'm not going to perform. This is the closest that I get to like, it's like being orator. That's as close as I'll get.
We had another question come through. Do you have a favorite setting of the text of your American hymnal? One that means the most to you?
A setting of the text?
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe they mean location, maybe?
Oh. Montgomery.
Good answer.
But I will tell you this story. The first time that the hymnal was performed, I did an open call so anybody could sign up and sing for 30 minutes. I had one person sign up to sing and she was terrible. She was terrible. And I think she did it on purpose. And it was painful to listen to her talking about control and like systems. Jennifer, that was painful for me because I thought she was ruining my artwork. But then thinking back to it later, that actually felt like the good work. It's, if this is democracy, if it is an open democratic call, anybody can come and sing, then her poor performance is also how it works sometimes. It doesn't always sound beautiful. Sometimes it's really horrible. And she's horrible. It was horrible.
So I think I misinterpreted that.
Oh, I asked a different question.
Yeah, a favorite lyric.
Oh, that's a good question.
Good story anyways, but
Marian Anderson is the last version in the hymnal, and she only changes one word in her version. I think she performs on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial because they wouldn't actually admit her into the, I forget the space that she was intended to sing in. So she changes I to we. It's like so simple, for me, who like rarely uses color and likes to make things as efficient as possible, that I to we is enough to change the entire song.
As someone who obviously loves words, what are you currently reading right now?
I knew they were going to ask that question. It's called The Transcendent Kingdom. I've heard it's really good. I'm having a hard time getting into it. I mean, this is the book that's beside me. It's about, what is it? In Search of the Phoenicians. It's like whether the Phoenicians actually existed or whether they were just like scapegoats, a kind of term for seafaring people in the Odyssey. Honestly, I'm looking for my next body of work. And so I cast a wide net things to read.
I don't see any coming through. Yeah, I don't see any more questions.
None from Earl and Connie. I just want to call my parents out. None from Earl and Connie. No?
No, but they did say proud parents watching.
Good enough.
That's fantastic.
Well, it is almost time to end already. 6:30 on the dot, actually. So
It flew by.
it did. It really did. This was a great conversation. And I just want to thank Jennifer for working so closely with Bethany to bring this to fruition. All the MMFA curators and all the MMFA staff that have worked on this so long for these past 3 years to get it here and then to get it up and, you know, be ready. And to thank you, Bethany, for agreeing to bring it down here and, you know, being so generous with your time. We have so many programs with you surrounding this work. And we're just so thankful that you're willing to work with us and share your thoughts and your insights with a variety of audiences on a variety of topics. So we really, truly do thank you for that. Again, we do want to thank our sponsors, our lead sponsor, Alabama Power, and Alabama Humanities Foundation, who also provided grant funds for this programming aspect of it. And we are just so thrilled, and we want to invite all of you, whether you are here in Montgomery or far away, to join us on Saturday for the Montgomery chorale performance of the Hymnal piece that Bethany's been talking about. It should be an amazing performance. We had a run through on Tuesday, and it sounds wonderful. And if you're in the galleries, we do want you to know that, you know, we do encourage you to come, but if you don't feel safe at this time, we also understand that. So it will be live streamed, like Bethany said. But we do have safety measures in place at the museum, and we are following COVID-19 safety protocols and all of that. So we just want you to know it is a welcoming and safe environment for you to come out and enjoy on Saturday from 11 to 3 Central Standard Time. And so we just want to thank you again, Bethany, for being here tonight and for sharing your thoughts and wisdom with us. And thank you to all of you who are here with us watching it tonight, and we hope to see you on Saturday. Have a great night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.